Today, we evaluate one of the longest tenured Cubs on the current roster, Seiya Suzuki. And we ask ourselves, why in the world is he always the one that comes up in these dang trade rumors? Let's talk about it. Welcome in, everybody, to another episode of Chicago Cubs Central, your number one spot for all things Chicago Cubs. Hey, I'm your host, Mike Jones. Thanks so much for tuning into this episode, y'all. Listen, the trade rumors continue to swirl, and Seiya Suzuki has found himself in a lot or majority of these trade rumors. Now, very rarely is it that Seiya Suzuki is mentioned in a trade rumor. And it actually happens. Actually, it hasn't happened at all. So again, you have to take these with a grain of salt. But they look at Seiya Suzuki as a valuable piece that could be moved in order to get more value or better value. I think a lot of people look at Seiya Suzuki's bat and they say that this guy at a different park might be somewhere around a 30 to 40 home run hitter with the way he swings and the way that he is confident in his swing. There are also people out there that say Seiya Suzuki is a bust and has not lived up so far to what we expected from him when we signed him here in Chicago. But I'm going to let you guys be the judge of this. We're going to talk about his stats. We're also going to ask the question, why the heck is this man always in the trade rumors? It happens every single year. Seiya Suzuki is always mentioned in the trade rumors. I mean, obviously, it's not going to be easy to trade Seiya Suzuki, but at the same time, that's a conversation that continuously keeps coming up. And where there's smoke, there might be a tinge. I'm talking about the tiniest bit of fire. So we asked today, why are these trade rumors circulating? So according to Bleacher Report, Suzuki has been linked as a potential trade candidate for the Chicago Cubs. Bleacher Report every single season posts its most likely people to be traded during the trade deadline. And Seiya Suzuki was the one that was mentioned this time for the Chicago Cubs. Now, again, Seiya Suzuki is someone who is under a 5-year contract with the Chicago Cubs, but the concerns about his long-term cost versus his role with the Cubs continuously keep coming up. With the Cubs, Suzuki is being pushed towards more of a DH role at this time, but his agent has publicly stated that Suzuki doesn't necessarily want to be a full-time DH. Now, last year we had Kyle Tucker. 2025, we had Kyle Tucker. Absolutely, Seiya Suzuki should take a backseat to Kyle Tucker. The question now is, should Seiya Suzuki take a backseat to someone like Owen Casey? That is the question here. Or should Seiya Suzuki move back to full-time right field and Owen Casey maybe come in and do a little bit of right field play, do a little bit of left field play, and also do a little bit of DHing? I think Craig Counsell can get very, very creative with how he wants to set the lineups for this coming season, especially if the Chicago Cubs do not add anybody else in the outfield. Now, obviously, reports have already come out that the Chicago Cubs plan to add someone and do platoon outfield, somebody that can be a substitute, be somebody off the bench. But that even begs the question, why would you do that when you have Owen Casey and you have Kevin Alcantara, who can both come off the bench and provide time for you? And I mean, you might as well get them some type of reps in during the season. For my money, I would rather the Chicago Cubs, either if you're not going to go out and sign a big name, I would rather you go let the young kids play. Now, obviously, I have been adamant it's very important that you replace the Chicago Cubs scoring that you're losing with losing Kyle Tucker. Now, I've been adamant about that, and I will continue to be adamant about that. The Chicago Cubs must replace that scoring. I'm not saying that has to come from the outfield, though. There are outfield options that could potentially replace the scoring threat that Kyle Tucker presented for the Chicago Cubs last season. But again, you also have third base that's in question. I mean, and again, you could also do something shaky at catcher position. There's options out here, as well as maybe going and finding somebody to be a DH for you this season. So there are options out there, and throughout this week, I want to cover some of those options as far as DH and third base. So stay tuned for those episodes too, where we'll be talking about exactly who the Chicago Cubs could be looking to replace at the DH position if Seiya Suzuki does become your full-time right fielder once again. And again, Seiya Suzuki's defense isn't terrible at right field. Does he miss some plays? Yes. Does it cost the Cubs some runs? Yes. But who out there isn't missing plays that isn't a freaking Gold Glover or a Platinum Glover like Fernando Tatis Jr., you know? So, I mean, it happens. But at the same time, I thought he fared okay out there in right field the times that he did play right field while Kyle Tucker was either injured or taking some time off. So, again, I'm not mad about it. Now, the thing is, moving Seiya Suzuki is going to be tough. Why? Because he has a full no trade clause, which complicates all the matters. His agent said that he might be willing to waive that right for the right deal at the right place. So that begs the question, what could be the right deal at the right place? I'm thinking sunny California. I'm thinking it's either the Giants or it's either the Dodgers or he might play for the Angels. I mean, I don't really know, but I'm thinking that it's probably one of those teams that he would be willing to waive that no trade clause for. And again, who could blame him? I mean, obviously the Angels aren't contenders, but the Dodgers and the Giants most seasons are contenders. And the Giants have a big ballpark over there that he could play on. That's a lot of ground to cover. If I were him, I'd be shooting for the Dodgers. But then again, everybody wants to go play for the Dodgers, right? So you look at this and you say to yourself, okay, the Chicago Cubs find themselves in this conundrum. What do you do with Seiya Suzuki? And it's the same problem we've had ever since we realized Seiya Suzuki wasn't the guy for defensively in right field. And it feels like it was an epiphany that happened for the Chicago Cubs. And they thought to themselves, okay, what the heck do we do now? Where do we go now? And that caused them to trade for Kyle Tucker. And again, like I told you guys a little bit earlier in this episode, I feel that the trading for Kyle Tucker made Seiya Suzuki step up his game in ways last season that we had not seen since he had come to Chicago. I feel as though you could trust him DHing. I feel that he did still strike out. He did still not swing a lot at the first pitch, which is why they threw a lot of strikes down Main Street. But at the same time, he had a career high in home runs. He had one of his best statistical seasons of his career. And again, I think that he is somebody that could potentially replicate this in 2026. But it depends on who the Chicago Cubs surround him with in the lineup. I think that's very, very important. So there's a strategic angle if the Chicago Cubs do want to keep Seiya Suzuki or if they want to trade Seiya Suzuki. Now, trading Seiya Suzuki could free up payroll and open up roster spots, especially if the Chicago Cubs think that the younger players are ready to fill those voids. Now, I already mentioned West Coast teams that could potentially want to trade for Seiya Suzuki if he was willing to waive his no-trade clause. But I also thought about another team, the Detroit Tigers. I think the Detroit Tigers could absolutely benefit from a trade for Seiya Suzuki. Now, what would the Chicago Cubs be asking for in return? Well, we've already talked about Screwball. I have a hard time believing that the Detroit Tigers are going to trade Screwball. They said they would listen, but I have a hard time believing that they're actually going to trade Screwball. So it all depends on what the Chicago Cubs could get as a return for Seiya Suzuki if they would be willing to make that trade. So, like I said, there's two different reports going on right here. Some teams like the Tigers seem like good landing spots for Seiya Suzuki, but other reports say that the Cubs are not necessarily inclined to move him because right-handed hitters with his production are hard to replace, right? And the Chicago Cubs already are trying to figure out how they're going to even replace Kyle Tucker's production. So when you look at this, the Chicago Cubs and Seiya Suzuki have been married together now, for 3 seasons? In 2025, he had 571 at-bats, 140 hits, 32 home runs, 103 RBIs. His batting average was at 245. His on-base percentage was 326. His slug was 478 and an OPS of 804. Again, and you look at this and you say to yourself, these stats from Seiya Suzuki aren't stats that should be taken lightly. He literally was one of the better hitters in all of baseball last year, especially in the National League. So we ask ourselves, can the Chicago Cubs replace that? Can you get that type of replacement from a Owen Casey, from a Kevin Alcantara? I don't think you can. And I don't think the Chicago Cubs should be looking to try to get that from them. Not this early in their careers. Seiya Suzuki is a seasoned vet, guys. He's played in Japan for a long time. He's here to produce. And I think that 2025 was his coming out year. And I really feel like 2026, he's going to stamp his approval and establish himself. If I had to choose, I think Seiya Suzuki is probably going to be an all-star in 2026. This is my hill, and I may die on it. But I think Michael Busch and Seiya Suzuki will be all-stars in 2026 for the Chicago Cubs. Again, he brings so much value to the Chicago Cubs because offensively he's a top bat. And I think that he also offers, a lot of great ABs for the most part, especially when he's not swinging and missing. I do wish that he would swing at the first pitch a little bit more, but hey, beggars can't be choosers. The risk for the Chicago Cubs, though, if they trade him, they risk losing the middle of the order bat. But if they keep him and don't build around him, or if he rejects the DH role, there could be more tension between these teams. Now, again, somehow Craig Counsell was able to smooth things out with Seiya Suzuki when the Cubs traded for Kyle Tucker. I assume that they're going to be able to make things work again. But we could, guys, be looking at Seiya Suzuki being your right fielder every day. And that's okay. That's okay. It's especially okay if he can repeat what he did in 2025 and do that again in 2026. So if healthy, he's likely to hit 30-plus home runs again, given his 2025 power. If used as a bat-first DH with occasional outfield starts, he can maximize his value. Or he could be poised to play right field every day for the Chicago Cubs. And again, the motivation behind all of this for Suzuki is if these trade talks continue, he might have extra motivation to perform in a year where he's trying to prove himself. So again, with Seiya Suzuki, you also do have risks as you do with any other MLB player. Some risks are, like I said, he could face some regression this season. Also, fewer starts could reduce his counting stats. His defensive value, if limited to DH long-term, his defensive contribution is minimal and could affect his WAR and long-term trade value also. So I want to look at the best case scenario as far as stats go for Seiya, as well as worst case scenario. So the best case scenario, he hits 255, 330, and 500 with 30 to 35 home runs, over 100 RBIs, and he stays healthy. That's big value right there, right? The base case is a similar to 2025 or a slight dip, but still a middle of the order producer. And then the down case is significant regression in average or power, or he's injured, limiting his impact. So again, I think when I look at Seiya Suzuki, I say that he can be a big piece of what the Chicago Cubs do. And my verdict is the Chicago Cubs should absolutely not look to trade Seiya Suzuki. I think he brings too much value. His bat brings value. And I wish the trade rumors would stop. But again, it's going to be one of those things where when you have depth like Kevin Alcantara, Owen Casey, and Brett Bateman, you're going to hear about the fact that somebody like Seiya Suzuki could potentially be traded. But again, I don't see it happening. I don't think it'll happen. Again, these could just be trade rumors. But I want to know from you guys what you think. What are your thoughts on Seiya Suzuki and the year he had in 2025? And would you be willing to trade Seiya Suzuki if the right piece and right deal came along? That's my time for today, man. I appreciate you guys so much. I'll be back with another analysis and another episode tomorrow. Thank you guys so much for tuning in and for watching. Make sure that you like, share, and subscribe so that you never miss a moment of the action. Until next time, go Cubs, go.
Thank you for watching another episode of Chicago Cubs Central, the #1 spot for all Chicago Cubs content. Remember to like, share, subscribe for more Cubs content.